Thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
My pleasure.
If I ask you about implications of Turkish general elections, internal and international implications of Turkish general elections, how do you read the results?
Well, for me, the big story of the Turkish election is that the Kurdish voters, especially in the southeast, but also in the cities, Istanbul, Ankara, swung from the AKP to the HDP. If you look at the voting patterns, what you see is the AKP vote didn't drop by as much as 5%, sometimes just 2 or 3% in most of the country. Then when you go to the southeast, or the Kurdish parts of the big cities, then you see the drop maybe 30%, something like that. So for me, what has happened is the AK Party has lost the Kurdish support in Turkey. And of course the implication of that is that HDP gets over 10%, and those seats go from the AKP to the HDP. So that's the story of the election. I think until inside Turkey, what is the implication? I think it's hard to say until we see a government form. And obviously there are lots of different scenarios here. At the moment it's looking like a CHP AKP government. I'm sceptical, and I'm sceptical it would last even if they form it. And another possibility is MHP. If they do have MHP coalition, this is really difficult because the Kurdish issue won't be addressed. It cannot be addressed with MHP in government. CHP is a more interesting coalition partner because they might be a little bit more open. So I think until we have a government, it's very difficult to see what the outcomes will be. In general, though, I think coalitions in Turkey are going to be quite weak because the difference between the parties is so great, and the political atmosphere is not very tolerant. It's quite polarised. So I can't imagine any coalition lasting very long. So I would think there'll be an election fairly soon, maybe in a year's time, if not before. Internationally, with regional foreign policy, again, none of the other parties will agree with Turkish foreign policy as it has been, none of them. MHP might be harder line on some issues, like the Turkmen in Syria, maybe also in Iraq, and harder against Kurds in Syria, and maybe also in Iraq. CHP will probably not want to engage at all. They will revert. They will want to take Turkey back to where it was, which is to stay out of the business of the Middle East. So I think the AKP's foreign policy in any coalition with any of these partners will have to be moderated. And indeed, foreign policy could be an issue, which means a coalition doesn't work. Turkey's relationships beyond that with the West, I'm inclined to think they can only improve. They can't get worse. Because I tend to think that the way the AKP has conducted itself regionally, the way it's conducted its relationships with the West, the US most importantly, but also the European Union, I think only the AKP would have behaved like that. CHP certainly would not, HDP certainly would not. MHP at least would say that they want to have a good relationship with the West. They might find it difficult to construct it, but they would want it. So I kind of think that relationships with the West might improve, but I'm not sure we're in for a period of stability in Turkey. So beyond predicting a few months, I think it's really very difficult.
What about the corruption allegations? Do you think the results will have any influence or any impact?
My guess is that one of the factors that will determine who is in coalition will be which possible coalition partner is prepared to put the corruption issues to one side. And what you might find is that parts of, say, the MHP will agree to ignore the corruption issues. So you might find that coalition parties themselves split, because some will say we don't need to pursue the corruption allegations, we can form a coalition, and others in the same party might say no, we have to pursue those corruption allegations. So however it works out, I'm pretty certain that, certainly for Erdogan, who should not constitutionally be involved in this process, But still, for him, he's going to want a government to not pursue the corruption allegations. And that might be, certainly for him, a major determining factor. Which party or which groups of people do you go into coalition with?
And what about, there is an ongoing Kurdish peace process actually.
Is
Will
there?
the results, I don't know actually, you know that. How will the results affect this so-called Kurdish peace process?
Yeah, I don't think there has been a Kurdish peace process in real terms. I understand you have to start small, but then you have to make progress. And I didn't see progress. I didn't see progress, especially from the government side. I think the government had a view in mind, which was that they could, by trying to bring the HDP into the system, they could compromise them, and the AKP could win and hold the Kurdish vote. And I think they thought that over time they could do this. So they could marginalise HDP, compromise them because of their relationship with the PKK and so on. And also I think they thought that if they keep holding out the carrot of a deal, it would make it difficult for the men in the mountains, Karelans and so on, for these people to maintain their position, because they could be made to look like the spoilers, the people upsetting the peace process. But I don't think the government ever really had a peace process in mind that was likely to be acceptable to many Kurds. I think they just thought if they could keep something going, keep the pretense of talks going, they could marginalise HDP and marginalise the PKK in the mountains, and hope to persuade enough people. I think what went against them was, first of all, actually the PKK has been prepared to hold a ceasefire. I think that went against the government in some ways. So the Kurdish side has played it, whether they intended to play it cleverly or not, they did play it cleverly, because they now look like the better peace partners than the government, because they've kept to the ceasefire. And also, of course, all the regional crises, which upset the government's plan, the Turkish government's plan. Because once you had the Syrian crisis and Islamic State in northern Iraq, then the Kurdish issue took on a life of its own in the region, and this affected the atmosphere inside Turkey. So I think this game didn't work. So I'm not sure there was really a peace process, because there has to be, if there's going to be peace, there has to be some kind of devolution. Whatever you call it, however extensive it is, there has to be more self-government in southeast Turkey than there has been at the moment. There has to be much greater language rights for the Kurdish language, and one of the things that HDP want is it becomes an official language of the Republic. Probably the release of Öcalan. There are lots of things there, and I don't see the government has ever been prepared to concede those demands. So I was always quite sceptical about peace process, and I think its circumstances have gone against the government in a big way.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.